No, go right ahead. We're ready to go. I just hit record.
Great, thank you. Hey everyone, thanks to our wonderful SICB colleagues and friends for joining this forum today. I'm Melina Hale, SICB's current president, and pleased to be here with a number of officers and folks from Burke Associates Inc., our management company. I'll go through the agenda briefly, and then we'll switch out of the slides and have everyone introduce themselves to you. So we'll start with the introductions, and then we have a full agenda, a lot of important things. First, Tom Sanger, our program officer, will provide an update on year-round activities and a view into what virtual SICB will look like next year, at least a little bit. Then we'll pass over to Janet Stevens, our program officer elect, to talk about the evaluation of SICB 22 and SICB Plus. We also want to cover a couple sort of general year-round topics. One is SICB budget planning, not just meeting planning, but the whole SICB fiscal year budget. We'll provide a little bit of information into that process, and then talk about the budget itself a little bit. And then lastly, we want to leave a good amount of time to discuss conference venue selection, which has been a tough job for Burke Inc. and our colleagues there this year, and we would love your input. So there's in GoToWebinar, there's a question box. You can write your questions. Those comments only go to the organizers on the webinar. So that is Brett and Lori Strong, who's another member of Burke Inc. So we will not see who submitted those. If you would like your question or comments to be anonymous, just type anon at the beginning of the comment, and they will see your name, but they won't share it if the questions are read out. We love input. We want to facilitate that. So please feel free either during the presentation or also afterwards to reach out to any of us for additional conversation. We really, really value it. All right, Brett, if you can hop out of the introductions, great. So again, I'm Melina Hale. I'm the SICB president through the next annual meeting. So my term ends in January of 23. I'm at the University of Chicago, and I'm in neuroscience as well as in biomechanics. I'll hand it over to Patricia.
Hi everyone, Patricia Hernandez. I'll be taking over at the end of next meeting. I'm ready. I'm ready.
You're gonna be great.
I'm at George Washington University, where I do functional morphology, biomechanics, and development of fishes. I believe Brett was next.
I think Janet's next. Oh, I can go. Go ahead, Janet.
Oh, there you go.
I'm Janet Stephen, and I am Program Officer Elect. I am in the Division of Botany, and I'm at Christopher Newport University. And my research interests are really plant evolutionary ecology and ecophysiology.
My name is Molly Jacobs. I'm the SICB Communications Editor. I work in conservation science, songbird conservation and shorebird conservation, and have a background in invertebrate zoology and larval ecology.
Why don't we do Beth? And next, Beth, we're just doing introductions, so you got here just in time.
Great. Thanks. Sorry to be late. I'm Beth. I am the past president of SICB, and I'm a faculty member at Brown University, where I study comparative biomechanics.
Well, Brett and Lori, maybe you two can go next.
Sure. I'm Brett Burke. I'm the executive director, and that's all I've got, I guess. Lori, go ahead.
I'm Lori Strong. I am your meetings director.
Okay, we'll turn over to Tom for intro and then agenda item.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Tom Sanger. I'm at Loyola University, Chicago. I kind of very SICB appropriate refer to myself as an integrative biologist, but with a very heavy development emphasis. I just quickly want to make two announcements that are relevant to everyone on this call. The first is that SICB this year is hosting a series of year-long workshops, 2 in the spring and 2 more in the fall, that are just trying to maintain our engagement with you throughout the year. And so I'll focus on the workshop that's this coming Friday called Engaging Diverse Audiences. It's going to be hosted by Sarah El Shafi, who's a professional science communicator and a long-term member of SICB. There are lots of spots left. I encourage you all to attend. I think the lessons that are coming out in this workshop are relevant for science communication, for teaching, for mentoring, for a lot of different things. Everyone from all career stages are encouraged to come to this. And then the only other announcement I'll briefly make is about our platform that we use. And so we've heard a lot of, I'll diplomatically say, feedback about the platform we've used for the last 2 years that was called Pathable. We're in the process of finding a new platform. And associated with this is going to be what we think are going to be improvements both from our end in terms of management, making the management side of things easier in terms of putting that meeting on, but also from your perspective, giving you a single point of contact for all of the meeting information. This will include abstract submission in one place, hotel conference information, the program. Instead of having all of this spread around in different places, it's all going to be hosted in one place now. And so we hope that this ends up improving the experience for everyone involved in putting on the annual meeting. But part of this discussion, and you will hear more about this when Janet speaks, is us trying to make really important decisions on what SICB Plus will look like in the future. Whether today or any other day, certainly Janet and I and Melina would really appreciate feedback from everyone. If you have strong feelings on what SICB Plus should look like, whether we should have any virtual component to our annual meeting or whether we should move on from that, is an active discussion we're having among the officers, and we want your feedback on that too. We're not trying to make this these decisions alone, but we only know what you say. And pretty soon, for those of you currently enrolled, you'll start getting communication from Janet specifically asking for that. So I'll hand it off from there.
Great, thank you. So Brett, I think we can put the slides back up and we'll go straight into Janet's.
Good. All right, so I'm going to give a quick summary of the survey we did for the in-person meeting for the 2022 meeting, and then I'm going to talk about the SICB Plus survey briefly and what we're looking at for 2023. Okay, so in general, the people who were able to make it to the in-person meeting in Phoenix had a fantastic time. That in general, people were very satisfied with the meeting. We had good response from the survey, and we had over 900 attendees at the venue. So the people who were able to attend and did attend had a good experience as far as we can tell from the survey. So that was excellent. And I know I had a good time. There were a lot of people there who were just excited to be at a meeting and to be interacting with people. And there were some really good conversations, and it was definitely, I appreciated the enthusiasm. All right, next slide. All right, we also generally had people satisfied with the COVID safety policies and procedures. And granted, this is a non-random sample of the society because this is the people who attended the meeting. But in general, those who attended felt like the policies and procedures were appropriate and that they were working for them. There's no evidence that the conference was any kind of a super spreader event. We asked for reports of cases during and after the conference, and they were not remarkable, especially in comparison to the number of cases that were present in the US at the time. So in general, safety policies went well. The one safety thing people were unhappy with was the fact that there were other conferences in the same space that didn't have the same rules. So hopefully we won't need COVID rules in the future, but at least now we have some experience in running an in-person meeting with safety procedures like that. All right, you can. And then also, I wanted to point out that we had a good diversity of professors, postdocs, and students at the meeting, that this pie illustrates that there were faculty at all levels, and there were a lot of PhD students, a handful of master students, a good number of undergrads were attending, as well as a good number of postdocs. So it was a nice distribution of career stages, which was nice to see. And you can go on. And then I found it interesting that there was very strong representation from PUIs. So 30% of the attendees came from a PUI. Some of those are probably the undergraduates that attended the meeting, but there were a considerable number of faculty who also came from PUIs. And yeah, okay. And SICB Plus, that survey is currently open. You should have gotten an email about it, or you will be getting an email about it soon. We definitely want to know how SICB Plus is going for everybody. It closes on the 9th, so you have a couple more days. And like Tom said, your feedback is absolutely critical for what we decide to do next. We want to know how it worked for people, what worked, what didn't work, and any and all feedback through the survey or to us directly is super helpful as we're trying to decide how we should have a virtual component to the meetings. And just to reflect on what has worked in the past and what we can continue to plan on for the future, most of the positive comments from the survey had to do with being in person. So everybody was enthusiastic about being there, and there was a lot of positive feedback about the fact that we had a meeting at all. Most of the negative comments were about the disruption of canceled talks, which is understandable and hopefully won't happen again, and also about Pathable and about Wi-Fi availability. So we have already ditched Pathable. That is not going to be a future problem. And Wi-Fi availability is definitely on the priority list for things we're looking for in new venues. So I really appreciate everybody who has filled out that, oh, you can go on. The next slide. And you can appreciate, I appreciate everybody who's already filled out the 2022 survey for SICB Plus. We definitely want that feedback. And come hell or high water, the meeting's gonna happen in Austin this coming January. So put that on your calendars. We know how to run a meeting during a pandemic now, apparently. So unless we're canceled by outside forces, you can expect there to be a meeting. And that's what I've got. And so if are there any questions in the chat, anything I should address?
No, we don't have any questions yet, but reminding people that they can type their questions into the questions box, and they can start with Anon if they want to start that way.
Yeah, and you're also welcome to email me if you want to know more about survey results or you have comments about SICB Plus.
Great. So Janet, SICB Plus itself is running through a few more days, right? Through the 9th. How, and the survey on SICB Plus will be open for how long?
So currently it's open till the 15th. I can extend it if it looks like we need to extend it for more opportunities for participation. This time of year is a little busy for some of us, so maybe a little bit more time will be helpful. If the responses are low, then I'll send an email about keeping it open.
Great, thank you. Great. All right, well, actually, Brett, you can stay on this slide for just a second. I'll give a brief overview to the budget. No, the next, go to this.
Sorry,
that one.
Gotcha.
Before you run on into the budget topics.
Yep.
So, you know, so last year and with the changes in the meeting and planning, we tried to do a lot to be transparent about the work of SICB leadership through the year, how, when decisions were being made. And a lot of that, of course, focused on COVID and on the decisions around the in-person meeting. We also spent a lot of time last year really getting down to the foundations of the budget for SICB, making sure that we were on top of it as executive officers. There's a finance committee that includes the treasurer, Miriam Ashley Ross, who unfortunately has a conflict with our time today, the past president, the president, and president-elect also comes, as well as sort of executive management at BAI. We've been meeting very regularly. We talk as a group, and then that those longer conversations get summarized and come back to the executive officers. You know, this is all of our societies. We're volunteers here, and you know, we know membership, everyone cares a lot, and you'll be in our positions, I think, sometime in the future, I hope. So we want to make sure to be transparent about the budget too. And so we'll talk about it a little bit now. In particular, our focus today is on planning for the fiscal year 2023. That starts in July of this summer of 22 and runs through the end of June 2023. So that's the SICB fiscal year. And what we're doing now is planning the budget for that upcoming year. On a lot of people's minds might be, and on ours, you know, all the time, is how are we doing this year? So the fiscal year 2022 year will end at the end of June. We're watching it closely. There are a lot of concerns, particularly around the meeting, which we try to have break even, but clearly can't with reduced membership and other costs we had associated with COVID safety and things like that at the meeting. But I just wanted to say on fiscal year 22, we are watching it. We will present details on that late in the summer or early in fall after the year closes. And for now, just to let you know, we feel okay about it. It was a difficult year, but our leaders in the society have been very responsible for a long time. And so we have good cash reserves that can carry us through even if we're net negative in the year. So SICB is okay, and we'll talk about it, but that informed our thinking this year. So we're going ahead, planning everything SICB does, and of course, putting lots of funds into supporting students and things we care deeply about. But we're also trying to be conservative in the planning so that if, you know, hopefully this won't happen, but there are additional problems with COVID next fall, if, as we've had over the last 2 years, unexpected things happen, we'll be okay. And SICB, you know, it might not be the most exciting fiscal year, positive fiscal year, but we'll be okay. So just to set the stage on the next year. So I think you can go to the first slide now in this section. I'll hand over to Brett, but just wanted to highlight some of the big accomplishments that we've made over this year with, you know, again, a real look at the foundation of how we do financial accounting and reporting at SICB. One of the big changes was that, you know, these sort of bespoke, very customized SICB accounting practices and spreadsheets had evolved over the years and been configured in quite a bit of detail, which made them helpful for SICB in some ways, but also very difficult to report on and to maintain because they weren't in a standard system or software. BAI over the last year moved from those bespoke homebred systems into QuickBooks Enterprise, which will allow faster, easier, better reporting and be more sustainable long-term for the society. That is we're doing this at my institution now. It's a huge lift, even for a small society at SICBook, to get those numbers moved over. So we really appreciate BAI's work on that this year. Along with doing that, the formatting has become more standard, easier to look at. Again, the reports will be easier for us and easier to share. In addition to these things, SICB has financial advisors who are overseeing our investment portfolio, and we have met regularly with them. We're on a 6-month cadence for the finance committee to meet with the advisors to hear what they're doing, how they're thinking about the upcoming few quarters and managing SICB's funds. And then the finance committee, under Miriam's leadership, has been meeting frequently with all the sort of financial ups and downs over the last few years, and is very engaged. So a lot of work, a lot of time has gone into finance that's been really productive this year. So I'm going to hand over to Brett to talk a little bit about FY23.
Yes, thank you. So before I go to the next slide, which is mind-numbingly tiny, we wanted to talk a little bit about while we did convert over to new software and also to new presentations, it's still very detailed, right? And this is a good thing. I know that you guys can't read this, but we thought it would be a good idea to show this is just two of the tabs that they're the two primary tabs that we use within our reporting spreadsheets. So the one on the left is the overall P&L for the organization, and then the one on the right is the detail that is associated with the annual meeting. And I just wanted to show this, not to really show all the numbers specifically, but rather to just show that we really dig in on this stuff, and we want to make sure that we're really looking at all of the lines that make a difference to the organization. So that's that. And then a more reasonable approach is to look at this and see what are the major sources of revenue and the major expenses for the organization. Of course, all of these have a lot of detail under them, but as we go through these, I'll just say a sentence or two about each. ICB is our largest net source of revenue. It's a fantastic boon to the organization, both mission-wise, obviously, and also on our finance side. IOB is building nicely. It's doing exactly what we'd hoped, and it is increasingly becoming a source, again, not only of mission support, but of diversifying our sources of revenue and types of journal revenue, particularly. Our annual meeting, you'll see that is on both and in both categories here, and it is the reason we put it that way. Our goal on the annual meeting every year is to net out at zero, and in the past few years, this year included, that's been a really tough thing to try to figure out and budget with all of the figures there. So. But our driving goal on that is to net out at zero. And then member dues, of course, are a big source of revenue. On the expense side, there's the management, which is BAI, Burke & Associates. And so that's a big chunk. And we have student support. A lot of this is enclosed within the annual meeting, but a bunch of it isn't. So the FGST, the GIAR, et cetera, are not in as part of the meeting. We wanted to call this out as its own bullet because it is such a big and important component for what we do. We have student support way over $100,000 a year, and it's a fantastic component of what SICB is. And then the last item, I'm skipping annual meeting. The last item is capital costs. So we redid the website recently. We're constantly looking at what larger projects that are going to span over multiple years do we need to take on? And so that's another source of expenses that are well thought out and well discussed by the executive officers before we embark on them. So I don't see any questions yet. I'm going to keep trucking.
Can I add just on the annual meeting, if you'd back up for a second? So the big issue this past year and going forward with the annual meeting is that there's so many fixed costs to it. And so we do our best to predict the attendance of the meeting, and Lori in particular and her group does a wonderful job trying to make sure we have the right amount of space and types of spaces and, right amount of food and coffee and things like that for the meeting. When there's drop off, like of course last year, we had a reduced attendance at the meeting. Those costs for those extra headcount doesn't go away. And so then it becomes difficult to balance. So we do know though that last year we increased the registration costs. They're still below a lot of other societies, but we're trying to do our best to not increase those to make up for the smaller meeting size, because we know people are strapped financially in a lot of cases. Before you go on, oh, sorry, go ahead. I wanted to see if Patricia or Beth wanted to add in anything, since they've been in the weeds on this too.
No, it sounds good to me.
No, so Melina, that's a very good point, and leads right into what I wanted to talk about on this slide, which is we, the finance committee, and then the executive officers, struggled a little bit with how do you predict a meeting for 2023, given what the last 3 meetings have been, right? And so we tried to find some rational basis for predicting the meeting size, and then, as you mentioned, then we can give Lori kind of marching instructions on the pieces that she can control, the pieces that do scale. So what we came up with was looking at what our member numbers had done from before times. So 2019 is the time we picked, February of 2019 to February of 2022. And then we were down on membership by about 13%. So we said, okay. And we ran a whole bunch of different scenarios to see what does that mean for the meeting. And so we went ahead and used the 13% reduction. So we had to assume something. So we assumed that as our reduced number of attendees for the 2023 meeting. And then we went through every single line item on the meeting projections and looked at, hey, food costs. Well, we know inflation has been hitting. What is the contract say about food costs or coffee? Actually, we spent an enormous amount of money on coffee, but we actually had a cap. We actually had in the contract a cap on the coffee increases. So, and it actually is less than last time we were there. So anyway, we went through that level of detail as a finance committee to really try to suss out what this meeting would look like with this assumption of a 13% decrease and trying to make and an increase in some of the fixed costs and scaling costs to try to make sure that we could have a meeting that was projected to be break even. And so we went around and around on that. We did all of that, and we should note that with those pressures, we were still able to keep all of the numbers for student support that we've done traditionally. Indeed, increased our student support for Mangum in there up to 60,000, where it's traditionally been 40. So really kind of proud of that accomplishment with the budget. And of course, we were looking at ICB and IOB and how we're tracking on those, and that all looked good as well. And the final item, the final bullet on this one, one of the items that is executive committee approved is to allow 3.5% of the trailing 5-year average of the unrestricted reserves, to take that and use that in support of operations. And so we decided when we were doing this budget to not do that as an assumption, because we wanted to have just a little bit more of a kind of conservative cushion in the budget. So the bottom line of the budget being break even does not include pulling money from our reserves. And so that we felt like was an important piece. And then I think this is back to you, Melina, unless you want me to do it.
Sure, yeah, I can go. So the process at SICB is that the fiscal year budget has to be approved by the executive committee, which includes chairs of SICB-wide committees as well as leadership and divisions. And so we had that meeting on March 21st and reviewed the budget with that group. It was approved unanimously. We had a good attendance, so that was great. And we're hoping that it'll be a break-even budget. That's what we're planning for. As I mentioned at the beginning of the section, we will be closely following FY22 through the end of this fiscal year, and we'll report out and make sure that we're open about those numbers as well. And then lastly, one of the things the last few years has raised is really how we do these budget development and approval processes. So pre-pandemic, the tradition was always to develop it and at the annual meeting in person, present it to the executive committee and vote there, which was nice. It's nice to have that discussion together. However, that's really early in a fiscal year to do budgeting for the next fiscal year. Typically, it would happen in late February or even in early spring. There's some advantages to being able to do it a bit later, since it lets us, see the outcomes of the annual meeting, have a little more insight into how the financial markets are going, for example, how membership is looking, because the membership year begins and ends in March, and things like that. So, so we're looking now at whether we want to go back to how it worked before or maintain this slightly delayed process, which is more information rich, and we'll be, of course, bringing that to the executive committee to make that decision.
Excellent.
Great. I think that was the end of what we wanted to present on budget. If there aren't any questions.
We are apparently doing an excellent job of covering everything. No questions so far, but we should encourage them again, because we really do want feedback. We really do want questions. And I suspect this next topic might have more of them.
Yes, this is one that we've spent a lot of time, all of us, on thinking about broadly, specifically, worrying about the venue considerations for 26. I think you can go to the next slide. It's been a tough year to select venues. And you see, 26 is pretty far out, but this is always how it has to work. And we know from our experts, Brad and Lori and their team, that we have to lock in venues fairly early to get places at a good price and places that we want. This year, with the great resignation probably and people being busy, maybe travel coming back, Lori's team has had Lori in particular has had a hard time getting responses from people. They're just so busy and understaffed. We think it's been hard for venues to actually engage in the kinds of research conversations we want to have with them, and that's delayed the process. We're also, as we all know on this call, in this sort of state in the US where their social issues are just every year, every day, it seems like, there's volatility, different states putting forward or passing policies that a lot of us find abhorrent, minimally really problematic. And so that's really complicated and something we're watching closely. It's really tricky to incorporate that type of information into decisions because banned states, the states California bans or other policies in states change so rapidly, and we're committing to venues so far out, as I mentioned, as we have to, that of course we can't know exactly what the conditions would be in the state at the time of the contracting. So we're in a bit of a bind there. The other things we've had to consider based on sort of what we've heard from leaders in the past, members prefer to go to warmer weather locations. That's definitely been a factor in the past. We want to spread out where we have the meeting in order not to, that everyone can have it close to home at some point, which is hopefully cheaper for airfare, various things like this. And a number of factors like that. So it's a complicated conversation. One of the things, just so you know, this year, we're not considering states that are either have pending legislation or passed legislation that would make it illegal to provide affirming care for transgender youth. We're not going to put our, venues that we've contracted with already, it's very difficult or impossible to change without real financial hardship for SICB. But as we're planning forward, we don't want to put members in a place where they could be arrested for going to a state where SICB is having its meeting. That just, is not okay. So we're doing what we can to prevent that type of situation for members as we make selections. So as you'll see, we've taken some venue options off the table. So I think, Brett, you were going to talk about some of the details, and maybe Lori will jump in too. And again, here we would also really, really value your input for sure.
Yeah, and we've had a couple of questions so far. I'm going to the first one, the answer is you will see in a minute. And then we had a thank you from Linda Mantel about your last point there, Melina, which I think several people will be thankful about. And then
Yeah,
the others we'll
interesting
answer as we go.
we learned about this concern from a family who had approached ASIH about it, and then another leader at SICB brought it to our attention. So we thank them.
Yeah, and what you'll see on this slide is that, I mean, so there's a lot going on this slide. I'll give a quick overview, but one of the things that you'll note is the lines in very dark gray are 3 New Orleans options that we were looking at, and because Louisiana is on the list that Melina just mentioned, they've now been removed, right? And so this is a matrix that we've used for quite a while, and it's some of the main components that we want to know about that are more on the logistical and cost side. There are, as we've just talked about, social issues as well that we're factoring in. But we need to know what the hotel room nights are going to be. We need to know what the internet costs are going to be. We need to know, how expensive is it to fly to that venue, et cetera. And so we kind of track all of these pieces for all of these different places for this year, for 2026, for the meeting that we're looking at now. And this is as of a couple of days ago, and so it's being updated constantly. We have Spokane in there, we have Louisiana removed, we have Washington D.C., Puerto Rico, Los Angeles, Pittsburgh, Reno, and Denver all still in the running. There are several that have been removed, either because they were on one of these lists that we mentioned, or because they didn't have availability or space, or whatever, the costs were astronomical, et cetera. So this is an evolving list, and we're working through all of these pieces. And as Melina said, they're coming in slower than they've ever come in before, which is a little bit frustrating, but we're getting good data as we move along. And this will answer one of the questions from earlier. We are going to jump back into specifics for 2026, but when you're thinking about, hey, where should we go in 2026, it's always useful to remember where we've been recently and where we're going to go between now and then, right? And so, for example, if you thought Seattle was a great venue and we were looking into Seattle initially, Seattle would be great for 2026. Well, we will have just been there in 2024, so do we want to do that again, right? So it's important to kind of remember where we have been, where we are going between now and then, as we consider where to end up. And we put together this sort of mini matrix here of categories, and this list has been in considerable flux over the past few weeks in particular. So we have these kinds of dream locations, right? San Francisco's awesome. Boston would be fantastic, but they tend to be too expensive in one of two ways, and in some of these in both. And one way that they can be too expensive is the room rates can be, $300 a night, and that's out of our league. The other way they can be expensive is that there are costs for the society, things like food and beverage, things like AV costs, things like union costs associated with the exhibit hall, et cetera, can be prohibitively expensive. And so we get lucky sometimes. We all know we've met in Boston, we've met in San Francisco. We get lucky because of the timing of our meeting, where sometimes we can fill a hole right there after the new year, and we can get great rates on the meeting rooms. And if that's the issue, or on the sleeping rooms, if that's the issue, then we can go to one of those too expensive areas. And we have expensive but commonly possible. So Denver often will return decent rates. DC area is hit or miss. Hawaii was just added from a discussion with the executive committee. And then we have this sort of category, which is kind of our sweet spot, right? So we have this category of financially good and usually has some good opportunities for us. Pittsburgh. We added Puerto Rico to this list. We looked at them a number of years ago, and there used to be some issues with getting freight there, getting the exhibitors there and all of that, but it looks like that might be better now. Spokane and Portland, they're all on this list. And then every once in a while, we get these offers or get these opportunities in this bottom right category, which is, wow, the deal for the society, the financial deal on this is so good that we really ought to consider it, even if it wasn't a city that we would normally think of. And so, again, this list has been in flux. We're welcoming discussion on this. Lori, I don't know if I've missed anything that you wanted to add so far. Lori's really the expert on all of this, of course.
Thank you. No, I do want to say we really do look at a broad, that you probably saw from the grid but couldn't really read, a wide variety of things, from price of a gallon of coffee to a beer when you go into your cash bars, to internet in all of the meeting space, or just to do that one live stream room. So and it truly is a balancing act. Because of the size we are, there's not a lot of hotels that can fit us in just the hotel, which is why we're often in convention centers. But we certainly would love to have your feedback, and if you have strong feelings either way, we're certainly open to listening to them and kind of going through them and trying to hear what may work best for everyone.
Lori, can you mention, often we book 2 cities at a time, and you've mentioned these deals with partner cities for 2 venues. Could you speak to that, because that might be something that?
Yeah, right now these Spokane and Pittsburgh are partner cities where if we book both venues, they'll work with SICB with putting money, giving money back to SICB for each of those sleeping room nights, which brings more money into the meeting. Bills go down, that kind of thing. And then there are other cities like Reno who they match dollar amounts of sleeping rooms towards their local university. So it would go to whoever was in that local university department. Their biology department would get an influx of cash from the Convention and Visitors Bureau out of us having their meeting there. So they're all doing, they're trying to be strategic right now and trying to make it worthwhile for associations to come to some of those locations that you wouldn't normally go to.
That's great. And then several of these have additional, like Pittsburgh, we're actually fans of that one because they were one of the first, their convention center was one of the first LEED certified convention centers in the country, and they have a really big focus on reducing environmental impact and all of that with their conferences. So there's little tweaks to some of these that make them fit us nicer than you might think at first glance. We are starting to get some questions in, which is good, but I'm going to hold them for a second so we can get, oops. So there we go. I don't know if Melina, you want to do this one and then we can do questions.
Yeah, well, I think we've talked through most of this, but as a team, will continue to investigate these options to pull out ones that don't seem feasible financially or for other reasons, and to get down to a short list. As we've mentioned, options have been shrinking for the social issues and other issues as well as we learn more. And in fact, if there are executive committee members on the call, a number of the cities that were raised in our executive committee meeting are in states that are on, this list that we're avoiding for 26. But we're happy to answer questions about those specifically. And and so we'll be going back. Ultimately, it's the executive committee's vote that makes this decision. We want to make sure it's open to the whole society to understand what's happening, but we'll probably have an executive committee meeting in May, sometime in May, to make a final vote for 26.
Yeah. Okay, so we have a few questions, and the first one, actually the first two are sort of tied together. So Heather asks, is it possible to offer some financial support, travel fellowships or something similar for faculty and students who cannot travel to a venue that's on the California state money banned list? And we have, so a similar question is, given our limited flexibility in changing venues in response to changing social conditions, is there a way to set up a fund to cover travel costs for people in states with travel bans? And so I can do a brief intro on what we did last time we were in Texas, and then we can talk about what we want to do or what we can and can't do moving forward. So last time we extended this was primarily focused on supporting students. We extended, so if you're a student and you were in California or a state that had banned Texas for state travel money, and you had used up your Mangum years, we said, no problem, we're happy to give you another Mangum year as a result of it. This one doesn't count, right? And so we did support that way. I think, yeah, as we move forward, this has been a discussion at the Finance Committee and the executive officers trying to find ways to support people that are otherwise banned from using their state funds. I don't know, Melina or Beth, if you guys want to talk to that.
We definitely will, and I think we'll do something. We're definitely trying and realize how important that is. To go back to the budget question, the issue is just how are things looking in the fall financially?
Yeah.
And what reserves do we have to put to it? But we'll definitely try to make some funds available for sure.
Yeah, and just an underlying component of Natalie's question about the our limited flexibility in changing venues. It really is. This is a very, I think we've sort of touched on this, but it's a very difficult situation because our timeline for planning and changing things is a longer timeline than the cycle of many of these state decisions and state bans and things like that. So it's hard to sort of keep up, if you will, and that's been a considerable issue.
Just the issues with changing are that the venue keeps the SICB's money. And if we were to change, say if we were to leave, we looked at this with Texas both this year and previously, so that's a huge loss. It stays in Texas. That money, they can re-rent the rooms and the space to get more income. We have to find a place somewhere else short notice, which would be expensive and is going to be difficult, if not impossible. So very quickly, you could see with a few states coming up that it would just drain SICB financially.
Right. Sonia Cavagelli made a comment. Puerto Rico meeting would be an excellent way to help that local economy recover after all of the natural disasters. I think Puerto Rico might be the sentimental favorite at the moment for a lot of reasons, and that would be really neat. So the next one's from Jamie Cornelius, and it says, these all seem great to me. Isn't travel to and within Spokane a little tricky, or have they developed more since I've last been there? So I'll start this and then Lori might jump in because we do have another question, another comment about Spokane that says, unless you live in Seattle, Spokane is a hard place to get to. Yes, Spokane is expensive to fly to, for sure. The city itself, or at least our experience has been with having other meetings there, that it has been developed quite a bit, and it's sort of, this sounds terrible, once you're there, it's fantastic. But getting there is more expensive than flying to Seattle, for example. Lori, I don't know if you wanted to add anything, but it seems to me that their infrastructure there has gotten dramatically better, and restaurants and all those sorts of things are really quite good there.
Yeah, you're correct, Brett. Getting there is more expensive. There's not a direct flight really to Spokane. There's direct from Seattle, or you can go Denver to there, but it is a multi-stop, which makes it a little pricier. But
Right.
There are other things. There's a lot of value in the convention center there. So those are some of the trade-offs, right? Is you know, can it be a really cost-effective meeting for between sleeping room rates and costs of the conference itself? In comparison, you know, $59 a gallon coffee as opposed to $120 a gallon coffee. So it's those kinds of things, which is why we kind of look at that whole grid.
Yeah, and Spokane, so you know, from the society business side, it's such a good location because their internet prices are really, really good. And I mean, so there's a bunch of things to recommend it. And the only thing I think of that, you know, that is really an issue is, you know, the getting there is more expensive for sure.
Mm-hmm. It is.
Barbara Jews says, entomology has gone to Reno a lot, and my personal experience is that it was a good meeting location. Yeah, so that's great. That's good to hear. And I know, Laura, you've been there and looked at the facilities and in the past and have been impressed also. I think it's financially really, it's another one that's in that one's in that quadrant, the really good financial options. And so I guess I'm hoping we have a hard decision to make between excellent choices or excellent opportunities for the meeting.
Maybe you could either go back to that slide or take the slides off so that people can see.
Oh,
us
sure.
more easily. Or you could just go back to the list slide in case people don't recall all of the names that were on there.
This one maybe.
Yeah.
The other one's too. The other one's hard to read. Yeah, and so don't have any additional questions yet, but we do have a few more minutes. And any suggestions? So these have all been comments about what we have already talked about. Is there anything where, are there anywhere someone is saying, oh man, we really ought to go to X or Y? And we may have already checked it out, but we may not have. So we welcome that kind of comment as well. I don't have anything coming in yet. We must have done a good job so far.
Yep.
Here we got one from Marianne Porter, and it is a good one. Canada. So you may, if you've been a longer time SICB member, you may remember we had a meeting in Toronto a number of years ago, and that's when we all found out that there's an entire city underground because it was cold. But yeah, so that's a good question. So we have had meetings there before, and I think actually, Lori, one of the ones that was supposed to be on the list, my fault, and get back to you, was we were talking about probably Montreal, I think is where we settled on Canadian cities. Yeah, and that would be a great one to add. So yeah, really good suggestion. We're getting things in now. John Harrison suggests Chicago. Chicago is actually has been removed from the list due to cost. So that one is one where it's in particular extremely pricey for the society. So it's the costs. We can't support the costs there, but great idea. It is a neat place to meet, and we have met there before. It's just been a long time. Valentina De Santos says, Hawaii, we deserve it. I like that approach. You should run for an officer position. There we go. Heather Leonag says, this has been helpful and informative. Thank you. Barbara suggests Norfolk, Virginia. APS has gone there. And the issue with Norfolk, I think it's not big enough.
We don't have a venue big enough in Norfolk to do SICB.
We have too many concurrent sessions for that.
And that's the same with Albuquerque. Albuquerque, we have that same issue.
That one too. San Diego. San Diego's great. We have been there before, as you may recall. We're sort of priced out of the main hotels, both on sleeping rooms, and California is really tough right now because they're across the state. Their costs have gone way up. for the society side, so food and beverage and union stuff and AV stuff. So that one's, so California, we keep trying, but it's a tough one. If we're considering indoor cities, Minneapolis does have facilities that could house us, that's for sure. What about cities near the big cities, something like San Jose or Monterey in California? Monterey doesn't have, I don't think, a facility big enough for us.
They do not.
San Jose may, but we're still stuck. It's a great concept, like Baltimore instead of DC kind of thing. You know, and we are looking at those. That's a great suggestion. Vancouver, Canada, wonderful. Last time we were there in '92. Trish, thank you. That's a great suggestion. Vancouver's incredibly expensive nowadays, and that's really the problem with that one. Nashville, thank you, Jamie Cornelius, for that suggestion. Nashville is excluded for 2 reasons, oddly enough. Tennessee is on that list that Melina referred to earlier that we're just flat avoiding right now. And also Nashville has become so incredibly popular and so expensive that it's shocking, right? You don't think of Tennessee as being priced out, but it really is very expensive. And the last one suggested is St. Louis. And Lori, I don't know if the facility there, we did just have another meeting in St. Louis.
It wouldn't fit at
February.
that facility, but
That one would.
there may be something
Missouri is
else.
also problematic policy-wise.
Oh, Missouri,
Okay.
that's right. Sorry, I was thinking city and I wasn't thinking processing the state. Yep. Yep. So that is the list of suggestions. Thank you, guys. Certainly the Canada one caught a slip up that I had. I forgot to report back to you, Lori, on that one.
Okay.
It would be great to find out about Montreal.
Sure.
Yeah.
Or Quebec,
Minneapolis.
or just Montreal.
No, Quebec also. Yeah, Quebec was mentioned as well. I wasn't sure Quebec had a facility big enough, but I was probably thinking of Old Town Quebec instead of the main city.
We'll add Minneapolis. That was one that we hadn't gone through.
Yeah,
so-
she got that one. I saw her grab that one. Yeah. All right, Melina, back over to you.
Yeah, well, I think that was the end of our topics for our forum, the end of our deck, and we're right at the end of our hour too. So again, feel free to reach out to us or to EC members that you know, division chairs, and committee, SICB-wide committee chairs. They can also bring this information back or talk to you. And we'll keep the conversation going. And thank you so much for spending an hour with us today. We'll plan to have another forum probably late in the spring, and look for the spring newsletter, which should be out later in April. So great. Thanks, everybody.
Take care, everybody. Thank you. Bye, everybody.